I think I'm going to surprise Mo a little bit. I know I'm here to talk about branding innovation, and I got bumped up a slot. But while I was in the washroom this morning, it dawned on me that if I talk to you about branding, it's going to put you to sleep. When we're talking about real challenges like blockchain and the future of it. So I'd, with your permission, like to scratch that. Instead, I want to tell you a story. Are you okay with that? Yeah. I'll be quick, but I'll tell you a story. I love telling stories, and my name is Danish, Farhan. Let's start at the very beginning of storytelling. So in my opinion, stories really began with a caveman, because that's when art started to imitate life, right? Our real life is what we do every day. Expressing it is a form of art. This continued with fine art. It continued in movies. It certainly continued in the way technology has embraced life and art both. If you look at that, that looks like a physical page turning, but it's not. This is what we call skeuomorphism. So much of it is inspired by real things. But we're now starting to move past that. So Oscar Wilde in 1889, in an essay called The Decay of Lying, said something quite interesting. He said, we've now reached the point where I think life imitates art much more than art imitates life. And this is quite interesting. So go with me. I'm not losing the plot here. I will bring this back to blockchain. Give me a few minutes. So if you look at what's happened to the concept of hipsterism, right? The concept of fashionistas, the concept of Kim Kardashian and the decay of everything linked, the concept of terrorism, so much of it is now inspired by art. So we're now starting to live a life that is copying forms of expression. And this is both interesting and dangerous. And we're at that intersection. Did you know that the first time people saw a rocket go to the moon was in 1902 in a French film called The Voyage to the Moon? It took nearly 70 years after for a real rocket to head to the moon. What came first? Art. What came first? A concept and a story. Did you know that in 1977, a villain in a Spider-Man comic actually strapped a bracelet on Spider-Man so he could track the surprise visits from Spider-Man? This led to the birth of the first ankle bracelet. And the ankle bracelet was invented so that, back in the United States, in the 80s, so 1983, they wanted to reduce the number of prisoners in prison. What came first? Art. How many of you have seen 2001: A Space Odyssey? It's a really boring film, so I didn't know whether I should bring this reference up here, but it's going to be divided. How many of you have seen the film? Impressive. So roughly 40%. Okay, good, 42%. All right, do you remember they had iPads, they had a Siri, they even had FaceTime. Now, when was that? 1968. When did we get all of these cool tools? 2010 onwards? What came first? Art. Let's move forward. Now I'd like to tell you a little bit of a story that is closer to home. This story isn't the one that Noah shared earlier, so it's a slightly different story. Thank goodness you didn't use the story. This is our founding father, Sheikh Rashid, His Highness. A man came to him in the mid-70s and said, a businessman, and he said, I'd like to build something in Dubai. Would you care to show me some land? So His Highness Sheikh Rashid took him to a plot of land, which was at the edge of the city, and he said, here you go. The businessman felt quite insulted and said, no, I don't think I'm interested, and left. A few months later, the businessman returns to find the birth of the largest construction site in Dubai. That was the birth of the World Trade Center. His Highness Sheikh Rashid realized the power of creating a narrative before art starts to imitate life, and life starts to imitate art. What he conceived with the concept of the World Trade Center was to create a city within a city, a place where you could prototype what Dubai was going to become in the next 20 years, all in one spot. A place where you could work, play, and live without having to leave the premises, surrounded by the desert. Now, how many years has that been? That's been 46 years since. But it makes you realize that all historic movements start from a purpose. And Dubai's purpose began 46 years ago, and I think our purpose moving forward has already been addressed by Wissam and Mohammed earlier, and Noah, And I think we continue to do that. But what does that mean? We have such an incredible legacy. We either plunder that legacy or we do something interesting with it and say the next 46 years is going to happen in the next 10. And blockchain is the birth of something that allows us to get to the next 46 years in 2027, right? Most brands sound like that. Would you agree? You have a story, you come in and say what you do, you say how you do it, and you say what you sell. But real stories are a bit like that. Wouldn't you agree? Now, this is where I'm going to tell you another story, but this one's mine, so I hope you don't mind. My story starts in Tripoli. I was born in Tripoli, Libya. Don't ask me why. I moved to Dubai when I was 3 years old. I attempted to go to 3 different universities. I was a computer engineer at I started programming at age 9, so I thought I'm going to become an engineer. I dropped out. I went to business school. I realized too many rules. I dropped out. I went to film school. I realized I'm becoming a technician. I dropped out. This was in the late 90s. What that led to was the ability to say, well, in order to create the rules, you have to take a leap, and you don't necessarily need the crutches of what you can be classified as. And that was the whole point. We're standing at a very similar juncture today, where we don't have the crutches to look to the past to build a future. Now, when I started the business, I was 19 years old. And as you know, one of the things that I hope blockchain will solve is that bankruptcy will no longer be a criminal offense. Back in the early 2000s, it was. And I almost went to prison in the process of starting my business. I didn't. I established a company called Xische that I still run. We diversified and started co-investing with our clients to help build a bigger story. We then moved into the recession where we were forced to rethink our purpose. And then after this incredible journey, we realized that we discovered our purpose. And since we discovered our purpose, the trajectory has been vertical, not horizontal. And I'll explain what that means in a moment. We realized that our purpose as a company was to help create the greatest universal impact by starting where most people conclude, and that's stories. Most people tell a story after you're done doing what you started. We believe that you tell a story before you begin what it is that you want to commit a certain amount of time to, a purpose that will help drive your actions. I want to tell you, give you a couple of examples. My colleagues, Yunus and Wassam, you've seen this right from the birth. When Smart Dubai was established, it was established with an ambitious vision to become the smartest city on earth. At that point, our work together with them allowed us to challenge that and say, do we want to chase the exact same thing as 500 other smart cities that will emerge in the next 2 years, or do we want to genuinely anchor ourselves in something quite unique? And that's when the birth of Happiness began. And this was 3.5 years ago. So I do urge you to think before Happiness was sort of the flavor of the month. Every credit card and ice cream is flavored with happiness. But what emerged as a vision statement, so it changed from becoming the smartest city on earth to becoming the happiest city on earth. What did that do? It led to a movement that made technology a means to an end, but not the end. The end was meant to be happiness. This led to something else quite interesting. A product, the happiness meter, is a physical manifestation of a vision that is just an idea. A happiness meter is a tangible way of being able to measure sentiment across a city in real time. But it didn't stop there. The story of happiness continued to evolve until it became a dashboard with the senior leadership all the way to the top, where the leadership of the city is able to gauge, much like a stock ticker, the levels of happiness in the city of Dubai, what areas, what touch points. This is unprecedented. What does this do to governance of a city? You don't wait for your annual report to be gauged. You're able to see from yesterday to today how many points up you went in customer happiness and how many points down you went and who was responsible for it. Another example was our work with the Mars mission. When we were working with the government on the Mars mission, something that we realized quite early on is that this is a generational shift that needs to be created, right? I know I'm still away from blockchain, but I will bring you back, I promise. When we started with this, we realized the only way to champion a change that will transcend a generation is to create a concept that is far greater than what you will see in your lifetime. And so if you remember, the probe to Mars that will be launched in July 2020 was actually going to be named something. And then His Highness wanted it to be from the people and by the people. There was this massive social media campaign to enlist names from hundreds of thousands of people around the world who wanted to name it something. And the name that His Highness selected was Hope. And this was quite profound. We could not have predicted it, but it was also befitting. Because hope is what the probe will be called, and hope is what it creates for our part of the world to champion something that a lot of the developed countries of the world have long given up. And this is an opportunity rather than a challenge. The other example, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed is a well-known name and a figure in this part of the world, correct? And when you ask somebody outside of the Khalij, outside of the GCC, do you know who His Highness Sheikh Mohammed is? And they go, yeah. Do you know what he's done? And people tend to remember, yes, he's built a nation out of sand. There's the world's tallest tower. There's the world's most efficient government. There's the pursuit to become the happiest city on earth. But then people don't necessarily know what he looks like. He isn't an icon that's etched like other revolutionaries of time gone by. And so we had an opportunity of working with the government on collating 30 different humanitarian initiatives, all under one umbrella. And this umbrella was the perfect opportunity for us to craft a story that already exists. And that's the story of how this one man has chosen to live over the last 25 years and lead a nation to become a beacon of hope in the world. And we thought, here's an opportunity to craft an icon which in one shot tells you the story of pursuit, of passion, and of hope in the future. I don't have to tell you that. The mere sight of that symbol tells you that. And this is the power of storytelling. Our experience working on the blockchain strategy was quite similar. Now, this has already been covered, but at the very beginning, the biggest challenge of the blockchain strategy was that when Dubai announces that it will become the first government to be powered by blockchain, governments around the world were going to get up and say, well, nobody's done it in the UK, nobody's done it in the United States. We've got little pilot groups and focus groups to allow us to understand this. When Dubai goes out and does this, is there going to be a narrative that is strong enough to enlist people like the banks, like the financial sort of sector in general, like other governments when it comes to visa processing and identification and things of that sort? You needed a narrative that was far greater than the concept of blockchain and the blind promise of blockchain. I'm not going to repeat the narrative. It was extremely well articulated by Wissam as well as Noah and Mohammed. What's interesting, I think, is that there's two ways of being able to start a movement. And with blockchain, yes, we've got so many challenges, but we have an opportunity to start focusing on the opportunity. In order to innovate, we need to find a purpose, a grand purpose that is greater than the value that you will gain in a year or two. Blockchain is a great example of that. What is our purpose with enlisting blockchain as an infrastructure to build on? If we don't discover our purpose, it's impossible to action it. You can say we have KPIs, you can say we've got metrics, but this isn't an actionable way of looking at a grand shift that requires nations to rethink the way they almost make themselves redundant, right? The point of blockchain is to be able to make authorities in their current form quite redundant. And this is scary and interesting. The second thing is that if you're able to craft a calling, a vision, a movement that can be inspired by the story that you create, then you have an ability to build and own a narrative that allows everything to fall into place and make sense when you commission the next project, when you find the next pilot, when you create the next success story. I think with that, I want to urge you to do three things today. Do you remember the stories I've told you today? Yes, if I ask you a question? I know there was some debate about asking questions, but if I ask questions, would you be able to answer? Right? Yes? Possibly? Okay, so I think number one, the first thing I want you to think about doing today is to do it. And what do I mean by do it? I think we are in an unprecedented time because we live in a nation that has allowed the possibility for us to do it, to make blockchain a central part of how we go about solving problems of the future. Number two, do it now. Why do I say that? It's because there's no clear leaders. All of the innovation that's happened in the last 20 or 30 years, had clear leaders that you wanted to emulate. We were the emerging world because we looked at the developing world. What's happened today? We're still the emerging world, but because we're emerging past the developed world. So now is the time to do it because there are no leaders, and each of us has an opportunity to become a leader in what we want to change with blockchain. Number 3, do it with a story. And I'd end with a question that I'd like you to ask yourselves. What will your story be? Thank you very much. My name is Danish Farhan. I love telling stories.